All right, guys, I've got a big fish for you today. A good friend and a fantastic scholar and a true gentleman, Darren Dahl. Let me just introduce him before I cede the floor to him. He's a chaired full professor at the University of British Columbia, so he is Canadian, proud of that. He has a senior associate deanship right now, so maybe we'll talk about some of these administrative challenges that he probably faces. Over 5,000 citations on Google Scholar. Recently, there was a tally of the most productive marketing academics who've published in the leading marketing journals from 2009 to 2013. And the gentleman that I have on my show today ranked number one. So a true top scholar and co-editor of the Journal of Consumer Research. Hey, Darren, how you doing, buddy?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, I'm very, very excited to have you on. Thank you for agreeing to be on. I thought I would start maybe first, sort of with a very broad topic, and that is when you first became co-editor of JCR, you wrote, as often happens with editors, they write sort of their vision of what they're going to do, and I think the vision of the four co-editors that had been appointed at that point was to conduct meaningful research. So maybe you could start us off by talking about that, first summarizing your editorial, and if anything has changed in your thinking about the issue, tell us about it.
Well, I think when we came in, like you said, all editors want to make a statement. And what's funny about that is it kind of feels like every statement has already been made. And so we didn't really know, well, how can we be a bit different? And so we kind of centered on, what we felt was important, which is, there's lots of different research questions, different research ideas out there. And there's often debate on, oh, this is good research, that's good research. And sometimes, in our field, people get into different little camps. And we wanted to try to put the flag in the ground that would say, you don't have to belong to this camp or that camp or that camp. What's important is whatever you're producing, that it be meaningful to somebody, whether it's consumers, academics, the business community, or public policymakers, for example. And so for us, we just wanted to try to, I guess, right the ship and say, what's important is to have meaning. Don't be something that's just, silly and irrelevant, so to speak.
And what constitutes the elements of meaningful research, irrespective of which target we're trying to be meaningful to? Can you give me a sense of what constitutes an example of meaningful? Is it just that people care about it, people read it, people discuss it, people consume it? Is that what we mean by meaningful?
Oh, I think that's definitely part of it. I mean, to me, it's if your audience is managerial, that they can read what you've done and they can say, "Wow, that's interesting. I can use that in my business." If it's a public policymaker, they can say, "Wow, I can use that to nudge somebody to make better choices." If it's a consumer, they could read it and say, "Wow, I didn't know that about myself. Now I'm more empowered in, my day-to-day activities." So, when we say meaningful, we mean, don't just make it an academic exercise in your head. Make it something that is going to actually, motivate someone to think a bit or to do something different or to see the world in a different way.
By the way, it's music to my ears because I couldn't agree more with you. And one of the reasons why I was frustrated with some of the outlets is precisely because I think oftentimes they have succumbed to this, and I just wasn't willing to play along with that game. I think one of the things that marketing academics do really well and are incredibly well trained at doing is doing science, right? So,
Hmm.
so methodologically, irrespective of the paradigm that you come from, you're likely to be a good practicing scientist. But of course, doing good science is only part of the equation, and at least in terms of heeding your call for meaningful research. You have to be tackling interesting problems, big
Right.
ideas. And this is, I think, where oftentimes, regrettably, and I think you'll agree, where we fail as marketing academics because we're concerned about, and I say we, I don't include myself in it, I'm being charitable by including myself in it. Uh, People succumb to these careerist pressures where they know what is required of them to have the proper blueprint to fit the
Sure.
paper here and there. I mean, am
Sure.
I saying something right?
No, you are for sure. I mean, and that's as an editor, my favorite thing now is to say you don't have to follow a cookie cutter approach to science. And my greatest fear was that at some of our journals, my journal specifically, people said, oh, you had to write a paper that looked like this. It had to do one study that did this, one study that did this, one study that did this. And they said, if you followed this formula, then you would get published. And in my view is, that just hurts science. If you put these constraints on papers and research projects, you know, you're just doing a system, and that stifles creativity and innovation. So I love it when I can write a letter that says, you don't need mediation because what you've done is interesting in and of itself. Let's just go with that. And that's kind of fun. I'd like to try to break the stereotypes that have come on into our field. So
Oh,
yeah, what you're saying is true.
oh my goodness. I think I need to start sending papers to JCR after hearing you say this, because your example of mediation is exactly the one that I was going to pick. Because
Sure.
I know of faculty members, of course, I won't mention their names, who teach their doctoral courses
Mhm.
with the view of moderators and mediators, right? I mean, so the course is not taught officially as how to publish in JCR, but effectively that's what it is, and I find that frankly quite epistemologically creepy. So wow, that's wonderful, Darren. All right, so I
Yeah,
guess
and
go ahead.
I would say, and that's not to say that, mediation and moderation
Of
isn't
course.
good and useful, but not everything has to be the same. That's, I guess, what I want to say. And in some phenomena, you need to show some mediation. And other phenomena, moderation's a better approach. In some phenomena, that's not what you need at the moment. So I just think whenever you have, a dogmatic approach to how to do science, then I think you're kind of hurting yourself, and
Yeah,
and that's a bit dangerous. So I've had fun trying to push back on that a little bit.
got you. Uh, Next, which kind of relates to sort of our grand epistemological discussion, is a presidential address that I saw you give. I think you'll correct me if I'm wrong. I think it was at SCP where you were
Yep.
talking about play.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and I mean, I'll tell you how I connected to that topic. But first, maybe you could give us a summary of that brilliant address.
Oh, brilliant. Okay, that's a bit aggressive. Brilliant. What I had tried to do in that specific keynote was to try to emphasize the importance of play in life and play and creativity. And those of you that have researched or know a little bit about play, it has a long history in science dating back well over 100 years, where people have tried to understand why we play, why animals play, why humans play, and what is it. And if you take a close and a deep reading on the notion of play, it's fascinating. And why is it fascinating? It's because we all do it. It's actually necessary to culture. It's necessary to survival. It's necessary, for happiness. And so my big push was to reconsider play in terms of doing research. And back to the previous comment, when you get too routinized and you get too, you know, you're just going through the motions, you lose the fun of it. And I think
Excuse me.
a lot of people look at academics and say, why the heck do you do that job?
Right.
And that's a fair question. But for me, I mean, a big part of it is this notion of play is that, when you're an academic, in some ways you're an entrepreneur without the risk, right? You have the ability to just have fun, chase down interesting questions, be curious, and that's playful. And so my address was to try to make people or get people to consider, where does that fit in your life? Like, are you actually having fun? Because if you're not having fun, the job becomes a little painful.
Right. You know, I, as you probably know, I mean, I've lived my life not almost, to a fault along with what you're saying, because
Mhm.
actually I did take a lot of intellectual risks, right? In developing the field of
Good.
evolutionary consumption, I was completely out of the norm. The first 10 years or so, I was the only guy doing this stuff. And of course,
You've always been a rebel, man.
there you go. Listen, what we're doing right now, talking, for me, this is exactly an instantiation of play. I get to sit down with somebody that I admire, who probably has a lot of interesting things to say, and I get to do this. I'm not making money on this. It's not appearing so fancily on my CV, but I get the chance to do this. Therefore, I pursue it. And so I couldn't, I. That's why when I was listening to you, I was like, my goodness, this guy really gets it. Perhaps because that's how I live my intellectual life. That I don't. Do you know who Lionel Messi is, the soccer player?
Yeah, of course.
Right. The reason I'm
Arguably the best in the world right now. I don't know anymore.
best of all time, best of all time.
Oh,
Correction. I am.
now you're getting really aggressive.
The reason why I asked tentatively if you knew him because I recently appeared on a very popular show where the gentleman in question had never heard of him, and I actually genuinely did not think that there was a human being alive on Earth today who had not heard of Lionel Messi, but apparently I had found one. It's
No, there's probably a few, mainly in North America, sadly.
and maybe some of the reviewers of JCR, maybe.
Yeah, they don't understand the beautiful game. So,
But anyways, the reason why I'm mentioning him is because a lot of people have said, and I agree with that, and it speaks to your point of play. He plays the game with the purity of a child who's just having fun, and he'll say it himself. He just loves to play, and you see it, the exuberance and the manner in which he just goes about playing is exactly what you're saying. So whether it be in the pursuit of excellence as a international soccer player or an international academic, I think your presidential address applies to many domains of how to live life. So that's
sure.
beautiful. Uh,
And I would try to make the link just because I think that's a really nice example. I've never thought of that, but it's very true. Uh, the fact that he can immerse himself in play and flow and whatever term you want to use, that's why he can create, right? That's why you can make that argument, he's the best maybe that's ever lived is because, he just loves it. He plays, and that enables him to create and do things that, other players haven't been able to do.
exactly right.
There.
Exactly right. So I thought next what we would do is talk about some of well, at least the ones that I thought our audience might connect with from the very large number of papers that you've studied. So I thought I would just kind of prime you about the study in question or the group of studies, and you could tell us a bit about it so that people who might not know what consumer scholars do will get a good sense of what it is that keeps us up at night. So I thought the first one, which is the one I'm thinking about. Oh yeah, this one. Well, colloquially, the fat suit set of studies. Maybe
Right.
now, of course, you shouldn't say fat. You should say differently weighted. That is the
Sure.
politically correct.
Sure.
So tell us about that stuff. It's fantastic work.
Sure. So let me set it up, I guess. There's different ways that people come up with research ideas. There's different ways that people approach research. And I'm more of a phenomena-based guy. And so what I mean by that is most of my research ideas don't come from reading other articles. That's one way to figure out, where are the research gaps in the world. Mine tend to come from things that I see around me. So most of my papers have a story behind them because, myself or one of my co-authors saw something interesting and we're like, why the hell does that happen? And so this specific paper, comes out of, being in a movie theater and walking up to get the popcorn. You gotta get loaded, right? To get the popcorn and the pop and the candies. And as you're standing in the line, I looked around and lots of different people. And in North America, we have big people, we have small people, we have all kinds of different sizes. And I was watching people as I'm in the line and seeing what they're ordering and making a guess, right? And so I see a really big person and I think, oh, they're going to order a lot because they're a big person. And in fact, they ordered just a little bit of, a little small popcorn, a little small drink, and then a little skinny person comes up and they have like two popcorns. Maybe they were sharing, I don't know. And drinks and candies. And I'm like, wow, I wonder if the things that other people order, does that influence what I order? Because I got up to the front and I ordered a lot. And I was like, well, why did I order a lot of stuff here? And so that's where the question started is, does the size of other people around us impact us? And most people would say, no, forget it, man. I'm independent. I would never be influenced by other
Right.
people. And so we wanted to figure out, is that really true? And so we decided we would build what's called an obesity prosthesis. In other words, a fat suit. And I live in Vancouver, and a lot of Hollywood production happens here. And one of the movie studios costume slash set creation firms is up here, and they did the movie Moulin Rouge.
All
So
right.
they're very good at building cool costumes. And
Right.
so we went to them and we said we would like to make this person, and it was one of our research assistants. She weighs about 90 pounds soaking wet, and we said, can we make her really big? And they're like, whoa, we want to do that. That'd be fun. And so they built a special thing for her that she could put on, and she'd go from 90 pounds to 200 pounds, and nobody could tell. Like, you couldn't tell that she was wearing this. And so what we did then is we put her in play, so to speak, to see if people would change, what they would eat or what they would order. And the punchline is it really does matter. And interesting, at least interesting to me, is if it's an obese person, a big person, you because of the stigmas and that we have in society against big people, you push away from whatever they do. So if they order a lot, then you order a little because you don't want to be like them. You don't
Right.
want to be like Mike, so to speak. Whereas if it's a skinny person, right? Because we have this desire, not everybody, but most on average, to try to lose weight and be skinny, you'll follow, you'll mimic whatever the skinny person does. And so if they eat a little, then you'll eat a little. If they eat a lot, then you'll eat a lot. And so, the most dangerous people out there are the skinny people that eat a lot of food.
So you're basically saying that people should go out to dinner with me. Is that the insult that I'm hearing here? Is that what you're trying to
Well,
tell me, editor of JCR?
if you eat a little bit, actually, you're pretty dangerous too, because then I'd be like, I just don't want to eat a little bit because look at that guy. No, you're fine. Come on.
I love that study. I mean, of course, because of the topic, but I love the fact that, I guess there aren't enough field experiments in consumer research, right? I mean, typically, of course, people love the ability to control things in a lab. But so, what is the reason? Why is there such a reticence or a lack of prevalence of field experiments? I know that now some folks are trying to promote it. I think there's a conference that happens yearly at UCSD. I think
Mhm.
On Amir is involved in it, where they try to discuss field experiments in consumer research. But do you have a sense of why that hasn't been used more than it should have been
Well,
used?
I mean, truthfully, they're harder to do and they're more expensive
Yeah,
to do.
yeah.
We have seen in the field, and I can say this as the editor, an increase in the number of field experiments over 2000 to 2010. It moved from about 10% of studies or papers were field experiments or had field experiments to about 20-25.
Hmm.
And then when MTurk showed up about 4 or 5 years ago, we saw an explosive growth in MTurk or online type studies, and the field studies went back down. But now field studies are coming back up, coupled to MTurk. But the reason we don't see more is number one, it's harder to do. It's just easier to run a couple of MTurk studies,
Right.
and two, it takes a lot of resources, finances, and three, sometimes it's also hard to get agreement or clearance from organizations, for example. Like we had a
Right.
study that we did recently that was published on luxury fashion goods, and we asked all kinds of stores if they would let us, do the study in their store, and they're like, yeah, no, talk to the hand, no, no, no. So we couldn't actually do it in a store, and we had to come up with more creative ways to do the study.
Right, got it. Next set of studies, or I guess it's really one paper, your sort of contamination paper. But before you answer that one, I have a personal anecdote that kind of speaks
Sure.
to your study. So in all of my courses, whether it be undergrad, MBA, MSc, PhD, I always have them do a research project that sort of takes them through all of the steps of the research endeavor. And many years ago, I can't remember exactly when, over certainly more than 10 years ago, I had an undergraduate group that studied something that was very relevant to your paper. They looked at, so when you're in a supermarket and you've got, let's say, six products, the exact same product that are in an aisle, right, in a column, uh, people won't pick the first one, but will go further back,
Sure.
precisely for reasons that you probably discussed in your paper. But of course, what was strange in this case is that it was irrational, and that there is really no contamination fear, right? I mean, it's not like you're holding fruits, and yet the phenomenon I think that you've uncovered applied even in this kind of irrational context.
Yeah.
Having said that, tell us about the paper in question.
Well, no, I mean the setup story is identical.
Okay,
Actually, it was me at a bus stop, and I'm watching people picking the newspapers when they had the newspaper boxes.
right.
People always take the second newspaper, and you walk over there, you're like, "There's nothing freaking wrong with that first paper," but people always lift it and take the one, and they do that like you say in grocery. They do it in like the Gap or Hollister. They take the second sweater, they go try that one on, and then sometimes they come back and they take this third sweater and go buy it, and it's people are weird, and so we saw that and we're like, well, what's going on? So we we ran a series of field studies, and we looked at, this notion of contamination that people, just generally are hardwired since we're very little to be worried about people that touch things. And we have a preference, not to buy something that's been touched. And so the setup in terms of the studies was, we used a real store and we varied, how recent it looked like someone had touched it. So was it on the rack? Was it on the return rack? Or was it, in the dressing room? And you get a nice linear effect that shows that, the closer it is to someone else touching it, the more you're like, no, I don't want that. And what's interesting is and this is where we talk about moderators, things can upset that linear relationship. And one thing is time. Somebody else has touched it, but just magically, if you think it's happened, hours ago, the cooties, the touch will disappear.
Right.
Whereas if it happened 1 minute ago, oh my God, it's terrible. And so, time is one big moderator. The other big moderator that we thought was interesting is obviously who touched it.
Right.
And you get a nice cross-gender effect. This is to your world of perhaps evolution. If it's a beautiful woman that's touched the product and you're a man, you can't touch it enough. You just want that on you. You'll live it. And the same with women even. They want, if a good-looking man or they believe a good-looking man has touched it, they just can't get it close enough to them. And so, the net result of this type of research is that, how you set up your store, how you let things touch or not touch, is really important. And we've looked at other contamination. Some of my co-authors have published some cool papers on how even products touch. So if you've got cookies in the shopping basket and you've got tampons or something on top of them, people like the cookies less, even though they're all packaged and they're not touching each other,
Right.
but they're touching each other in the packages. And so people have very interesting, hardwired rules on this notion of touch.
Well, I mean, the word hardwired is a perfect segue to what I was going to talk about next, because of course, evolutionary psychologists have studied disgust as an evolved response, and where I think some of the work that you're talking about might join some of the work that the evolutionists talk about is that they viewed, and actually I have a study that I haven't published, which I'll talk about next to you about. They view disgust not as a domain general response, but rather there are domain specific triggers of disgust that can lead us down different pathways. So, for example, sexual disgust will be different than moral disgust, which will be different from pathogenic disgust, which is, I guess, the example that you were talking about in your context. And so with one of my former graduate students, what we tried to do is take exactly this idea that had been developed by evolutionary psychologists and apply it in a consumer setting whereby we would prime people for one of these three sources of disgust, and then see downstream whether their attitudes towards products, whatever the dependent measures were that we were measuring, would only be activated if the product was relevant to that source of disgust. So if I'm talking about online dating, then the sexual disgust context might be relevant. If I'm talking about food, then the pathogenic disgust. And so anyways, the bottom line is that we didn't really get very compelling results, and we haven't pursued it yet. But I wonder, I guess that could kind of lead us to the next question. And as an editor, of course, you're in a perfect position to talk about this, right? So we put it away because we realize that it's going to be a very uphill battle to overcome the file drawer problem and the null effects bias, which of course is a real shame, because I'd like to think that even if the results didn't come out as we had planned, there is an interesting story to be told. What's your view on that? I mean, as a scholar first, but then of course as editor second.
Well, I mean, there's a lot of debate currently, in the field on issues related to everything from sample size to file drawer problems to, what is the right, what are the things that we should be publishing? And I think you point to something that's very interesting, that, we do have a bias towards papers and research projects that do show, not significant findings, things that follow a pattern, things that, are much clearer perhaps than the messy world really is. That's been the norm, I guess you could say, in the field for decades upon decades. Is there changes afoot? I think so at some level, maybe not so much on null studies per se, but more or less on the need for replication and the need
Right.
to, be satisfied with what we're seeing. And there's lots of different opinions on this, frankly. My belief, or where I sit, is, it's difficult to find effects that are so incredibly robust that they will transfer in every culture in every situation, and it's difficult to replicate, to be honest. Even if effects are real. So the contamination effect that we found is a pretty robust effect here in North America. But what's interesting is I do believe, though I haven't tested it, that in other cultures, the notion of touch actually is in many ways positive. I've had many people from Israel tell me as example that, you know, when things have been touched by a lot of people, that means they're valuable and you want
Right.
them, right? And so, I think we have to be sensitive that, there's lots of interesting things out there. And when, again, back to where we started, when you have a very dogmatic view of things, whichever side you're on, I think it's a bit dangerous.
Right.
And maybe the field is opening up. And it's not just, consumer behavior. It's you could argue science in general
Right.
that, because we now, and you could say technology might drive this, we have the ability to put a lot of stuff out there,
Right.
and we can let people see.
Exactly.
And the collective, will define it. Big data of science, I guess.
I mean, my position would be as follows. Sometimes you get a null effect because, frankly, the the stuff that you're studying, the postulated links, the bedrock of your theoretical concepts is incorrect, right? So if I try to
Oh,
say,
sure.
right, in which case it makes perfect sense that you as the editor would reject this paper. I mean, frankly, not because the effect is null, but because it's a bunch of nonsense. On the other hand, in other cases, you get a null effect because, so I'll give you an example from a study that I had done many years ago,
Yeah.
which I never published. I was looking at the effects of dysphoria, the opposite of euphoria. So sort of a enduring state of blueness. So it's more than just I feel, shitty today. It's, my dog has passed away and I'm not getting along with my wife. I hate my job, but it's not quite clinical depression. And
You were in a dark place when you ran this study, man.
no, actually, you know how I got motivated to do that study? I had seen George Lowenstein giving a an invited lecture at an economic psychology conference, and I think it was in Norway in 1995, where he was talking about the need to incorporate hot cognition into decision making, which eventually
Well,
led to his classic paper in OBHDP on hot versus cold cognition.
sure, of
And
course.
as somebody who studied, other than, of course, my main thing is evolutionary psychology and evolutionary consumption, I was trained in psychology of decision making, sequential choice, and so on. I thought, oh, why don't I study these sequential choice issues in the context of people who are really, in a sense, blue? And so I did a study where I looked at dysphorics versus non-dysphorics in terms of how much effort they put into a sequential task. And I think there was something like 16 or 17 different dependent measures. And on almost all of them, I obtained no difference between the two groups. So if anything, there was a clear robustness in the null effect, right? And that, in a sense, coincided well with the literature because some people had found that dysphoria improves performance, some had found it worsens it, some had found an inverted U shape. So it was all over the place. So I had sent the paper to a special issue of Cognition and Emotion on decision making and emotion. So it couldn't have been more perfectly placed. And then the editor in question, someone that we both know who's a lovely guy and a top scholar, said, "Hey, great stuff, but null effects." And now, looking back in retrospect, this is more than 18, 19 years ago. To me, it makes no sense that this paper has never been heard other than me now discussing it with you in a few other cases. There is value in that story having been documented in the archival record, yet because it was all null, it's gone, it disappears. That's not
Yeah.
good.
I mean, there's just no journal of null effects, guy. That's all I can say. There's no
Yeah.
journal of null effects. I think those types of papers and statement points, though, are going to start showing up because of the online world we live in now. And I frankly think there's value in that. I think journals won't publish those, though, because they are looking for effects, if you will.
Right.
And the question will always remain, is it null effects or is it just, the studies were not designed well, there's something wrong, and that's always difficult to ascertain, I mean, we just can't. But that being said, I agree with you. I think there's value in knowing the null effects that are out there, and that's the issue with the notion of replication is some effects replicate a lot, but maybe we don't have the full picture because we don't know the times that they don't replicate, if that
Right.
makes sense.
Right. No, I get you. All right, let's move on to the next one.
It's
Oh,
interesting
I'm
though.
sorry.
I
Go
mean,
ahead. Yeah.
that's a debate that's going to continue.
Right.
So you could probably have that with like every CB person you have on the show.
Right. By the way, I've had so far Brian Wansink,
Oh,
Michel
he's great.
Michel Pham, and yourself, and I'm looking at a few others. And later we'll talk about actually the idea that a lot of people have reticence to do the things that you and I are doing right now. And in a sense, I of course have to pick people that are very prominent in the field, but people who can pull off what we're doing. And regrettably, it's not as common as you might otherwise think. A lot of people are quite timid to actually appear in such contexts. So we'll talk about that later. But let's move on.
That's surprising to me, actually.
Is it? Okay, well,
Yeah.
do you want to tell me about it now, or do you want to
Well,
leave it for...
most of us probably think that people just aren't that interested. So I mean, I think
Well, okay, so maybe we'll talk about it now, and then we'll go back to some of your other research. So one of the things that I've certainly tried to champion in a small way, I hope that I'm contributing to that discussion, is that look, I think it's wonderful. It is a central part of our job to create new knowledge. I mean, obviously, and I love to do that, and you love to do that. It's important to teach that knowledge to our students, but it's also important to have a clear bridge to the outside world, to the public at large.
right.
I mean, if I can write something that could be consumed by 2 million people, uh,
Yeah.
I mean, you'd have to be a lunatic to think that that is not better than if it is read by 3 reviewers and an editor and your mom, right? So the reality is that we are in the business of creating memes and spreading memes, right? All bets are off. We should be doing everything, but yet, frankly, and maybe you'll correct me if you think I'm wrong, frankly, and this is not just marketing academics, academics in general have been quite slow at taking advantage from the unbelievable forums and portals that are now afforded to us. Going back to the idea of play, I'm literally a child at play at this point, right? Because I've got all these tools for me to sit down with incredible people. I have a big megaphone so I could share ideas. Sometimes I get blowback from people. Sometimes I get lots of love. But the opportunity to be constantly engaged in a very broad arena, I'm a kid in the candy store. So, well, first of all, do you think that my assessment is right, that not enough academics are taking advantage of these tools? And if so, what can we do to change it?
Well, I mean, so frankly, right out of the gate, 100%. And there's been some neat editorials written about this in the last little while. No, it just doesn't happen. There's not enough communication. The vast investment that governments and universities put it into research. Yes, there's payoff, but it doesn't filter. It doesn't come down nearly enough. And there's lots of I mean, I'll be very frank. There's lots of reasons for that. The biggest one is incentive problems. There's no incentives, and I'll call your bluff here. You said it at the beginning. You don't do this for any reward. There's no. You don't put it on your vita. There's no incentive. The incentive structure is not to be on programs, to tweet, to write blogs. There's no incentive for faculty members to do this. The incentives systems built into a professor's life are to produce more research. They're not to necessarily communicate the research, except to the students. So our incentives are really to do the research and to teach class, where the research does come to life at some level. So the incentive structures are misaligned if that's what government and universities want us to do. The second thing, and you kind of allude to this as well, is most academics are not trained to do this. And what I mean by that is, when I decided to become an academic, people warned me against it. They said, academic, Darren, I don't know. I mean, academics are socially awkward and they have bad fashion sense, right? And that's,
And they wear sandals.
yeah, bad fashion sense. And I've seen you wear sandals, by the way, sir. So I would say that we're not trained to do these types of things, and some people just by personality, and this may be why people are reticent to come chat with you, is they're not really comfortable in front of a camera or putting their voice out there. It's just not who they are. The third big one would be translation, and a lot of the research that's done isn't easily, you know, research I do sets up with fun little quirky stories, and we could talk about them for hours. But some of the research that like mathematicians or finance professors or you know deep cognitive psychologists, that's not easily translated into things that people would be interested in. And so, those are the big three I would say on why we don't see, the trickle down like we should.
Right.
I do think it is changing though. I think a lot of universities now have PR and communicators that do the translation. I think a lot of the journals see the value. So our journal has a PR program where we try to engage the mainstream media. And then we have people, like you. There's always a subset of faculty that kind of enjoy it. It's kind of fun.
Right, exactly. Well, I do think that I mean, I don't think there's an official change in the incentive structure yet, but I do
Yeah,
see there is a difference in how people perceive some of these pursuits, maybe even as close as 10 years ago, as you
oh,
said, to now,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
I'm
We
sorry,
have a
go ahead.
line on our faculty report. So each year you have to
Okay.
write a big report on what you do. And talking to media or blogging or would never have been on the report 10 years ago. And now it's on the report. So the dean's office will say, okay, good,
Right,
yay.
right.
And so that's a change.
Yeah, good, good. That's great to hear. I mean, I know that I think it's the National Science Foundation. I can't remember where I heard this, but in one of the big granting agencies, at least in the U.S., they now kind of get you to write. And I hope I'm not misspeaking. I heard this from another source. So if they're right, then I'm right here. That you kind of almost have to write an abstract that is the equivalent of a press release to sort of demonstrate what would be the sort of digestible, consumable part of your research that would be sold in a press release, which again speaks to the fact that these big granting organizations are looking for work that somehow can be linked to the greater public. So I think that's wonderful. And of course, us saying that does not take away from the fact that you still have to be doing the work that gets published in JCR and in the other great journals. So we're all on board. So that's good. By the way, I haven't yet asked anybody who's refused, but maybe that's because I'm making sure to ask people that I think are certain to say yes. I'm still waiting
Well,
for one person, but
so the experiment is not completed yet, sir.
it's not completed yet. That's right. All right, let's go on with some of your other work. I think I've got two more examples, and then we'll go on to some other ones. Your announcer speech characteristic study that caught my attention because there's a lot of work that looks at voice quality from an evolutionary perspective as marker of estrogen or testosterone. Now, I'm not sure if that paper was published, but maybe you could tell us about that study.
Yeah, I mean that study was published in the Journal of Consumer Psychology,
Okay.
and we were just interested listening to different people on the radio, kind of wondering, what was effective, what was not effective, because one of the PhD students here actually, always used to joke, I don't have a face for TV, I have a voice for radio, and that's a harsh self-criticism, but it made us laugh, and so we thought, well. There isn't a lot of research that's been done in marketing. There is in other fields, but not in marketing in terms of, what's effective. If you break down, various aspects of speech, what's important. So, we had fun. We actually took the student because, okay, maybe what he was saying was true. I'm not saying, but we took him into, a production house that does these types of commercials, and then we had him do the radio play, and then these days, I mean, let's be honest, some of these music stars, Britney Spears et al., they can have their voices played with a lot live to recording, and so we did the same thing with this kid, and we changed very specific aspects, and that's, to your point, what scientists want to do is we isolated, how quickly you say the syllables, right? And then we isolated the pauses between what people say. And so we started to play with these different things, and we also looked at the contour when people go up and down as they talk, right? And tried to see through a bunch of different studies how these different aspects of speech, influence the perceptions, right? Because you're sitting there listening to the radio, and many of us will if you go back to the 40s and 50s, the real radio shows, you create images in your mind of what this person would be like. So when you hear these different types of speech, what are the attributions you make? Do you think the person is smart? Do you think, they're a liar? What kind of things actually come out of this? And so that's what this research was specifically looking at, and in trying to identify when you think about radio and you have an announcer, where are you going to get the best bang for your buck? Well, at the end of the day, a lower tone, if it's a male, we just work with male voice, and uses fairly quick syllable pronunciation. That's going to give you the best outcome. And so that was what we were trying to do in that specific line of research, is play a lot with the aspects of speech. What's interesting to me is that hasn't been a big area of even after that study. For some reason or the other, it hasn't caught on as an area that people do a lot of research in.
I actually, yeah, that wonderful. I think I might have written to one of the top evolutionary guys who studies voice to try to see if, to sort of heed your call of trying to do voice-related work in consumer behavior from an evolutionary perspective, but it has never gone anywhere. But maybe this now motivates me to write to him again. I actually have a really interesting personal anecdote that speaks exactly to your research, and I guess I'm really engaging in a lot of self-deprecation here. And you'll see
it's good for you. It makes you stronger.
Exactly, it's a measure of self-confidence, right? If you
there you go. Keep telling yourself that.
This is many years ago, before I was married. Obviously, I had started chatting to this woman on the phone who was actually a professional model, and in a second you'll see why that's relevant to the story. And so we chatted many times on the phone, and then finally we agreed to meet. So we meet somewhere downtown in Montreal. And then I remember, as I met her, I looked at her and I said, do I detect some disappointment in your grimace right now? And she said, no, it's just that in speaking to you on the phone, I always thought that you'd be much taller. So there goes testosterone levels of Gad Saad. I'm shot. I'm done before I'm out of the
well, I think both of us are relatively vertically challenged, my friend. So yeah, I can say I've kind of been there myself.
Yeah,
that's quite funny, actually.
Yeah.
So people create these images in their head of when you hear that voice. What's it going to look like?
Exactly.
It's fascinating.
Yeah. All right, last one, and then we move on to something else. And I chose this one. Well, first, it's very easy to be interested in condom research, but also because I think that's some of the research that you did, which actually, again, speaks to some of my interests of interdisciplinarity, right? This is where you published. I mean, yes, you've cornered the market in the top marketing journals, but you haven't as much published in some of the other journals. And here you did publish in, American Journal of Public Health and other great journals. So tell us a bit about that research, and then maybe we could link it to a greater discussion on why we don't have greater interdisciplinarity in consumer research. So take it away, sir.
Sure. Well, so this line of research really came at the start of my program. I came into the PhD program thinking I would do research on cross-cultural consumer behavior. But the fellow I came to do the research with left the university before I got here. And so when I showed up, I really didn't have a research topic. And so I managed to finagle my way into working with a fellow named Jerry Gorn, who is
love him.
Yeah, he's an old Montreal boy.
That's right.
There you go. And he was known for classical conditioning work. So why consumers are similar to the dog that would foam at the mouth at the bell type of thing. So I thought that's what I would be doing. But when I went to see him, he said that he had received a big grant, new money, and he wanted to do research in a new area. And I thought, well, that's great. What's it going to be? And he said, I want to do research in sex. And I was like, oh, yes, sex. That's outstanding. I am going to have a lot of sex. And he was like, no. I want to do research on condoms. And I was like, that's creepy. All right, I'll use a lot of condoms, and I'll tell you which is the best. He's like, no, not usage. I want to watch people buy condoms. And I'm like, that's really creepy. And he's like, no, that's the research project. So the first thing I ever did as a PhD was I hung out in a drugstore for 6 hours every Friday and Saturday night for 4 months, pretending to be a stock boy doing shelf facings in the aftershave section. And I watched people and how did they buy condoms? And I recorded everything. Did they take a lot of time? Did they come with other people? Did they take the box off? Did they rotate it? Did they read it? Did they hide it under other things? Did they take it to the pharmacist to buy? Did they shoplift it? I recorded everything.
Is it just you're doing it in vivo, or you're taping it and then content analyzing it
No,
later?
in vivo,
Okay.
they couldn't set up the film, and they wanted
Okay.
me to also follow them, to stalk them, creepy, to see, when they went to the cashier, did they choose an old person, a young person, a male or female? So really get the whole, and you couldn't capture that with camera, at least at that point in time. And no, so that was the job, and it was a lot of work, but it led to the type of researcher I am, because as you watch people, you see a lot of interesting things. I caught a lot of shoplifters. The drugstore said if the PhD didn't work out, they'd hire me back as a stock boy. So, it was good, but what we were trying to do, and the paper that was published here, was trying to figure out, well, what are the barriers, right? What stops people? And this says how old we are. This was back in the early 90s, right at the time of AIDS, and
Yeah.
how do we help people make better safe sex choices? Um, it was, what are those barriers? Is it an information barrier? Is it a price barrier? Is it an emotional barrier? And what really came out of that specific work was the emotional. All of these things were barriers at the time, but the emotions that people feel. Some people really have a hard time buying what we call socially sensitive products. And what's interesting is often in drugstores at the time, it's changed a bit. They have what they call this aisle of shame, and they have all of these products together, like tampons and adult diapers and lube and things that are for many people really awkward purchases. And so that's what we were trying to look into is when do these emotions flare, and can you come up with marketing interventions that can help people overcome this embarrassment that they have, because you're putting your life on display. You're saying,
Right.
look, I'm going to have sex. And what's interesting is people are different. Some people would hold the condom up in the air, they're like, yeah, I'm getting laid. And then other people, they want to hide it, and they jump in and grab it and jump out. So it's an interesting product to do research on,
And I
for
was
sure.
gonna say, you really want to advertise it if you're buying the Magnum size
There you
condom,
go.
not if you're buying
Exactly.
the micro penis version. I got you. Uh,
Well,
so
there is no such thing. Marketers are not dumb. No, nobody buys that one.
nobody
So
buys that one.
no, that product does not exist.
But I think in one of your studies within the condom research line, you had tried to manipulate the size. We're speaking about size, but the size of the coupons. And then I think, if I
Yeah.
remember correctly, you had found that even yet there was a difference in terms of them redeeming that coupon as a function of the size of the coupon rebate, but not nearly as much as what you would have thought. Is that a fair summary of
Yeah, no,
what?
that is true. We work with lifestyle condoms, and we distributed coupons at gay pride parades and at other types of venues, very specific to that community, actually. And we had hoped that this would really drive, as did the company. And we found that the price sensitivity was not as big of a barrier, that this type of intervention, big coupon like 75% off versus 10% as example, didn't drive as much as one might think. And that was an idea to try to calibrate these different
Mhm.
barriers. And the pricing one, we found, at least in our research, wasn't as extreme. I mean, price matters, I'm not saying that. But in terms of some of the other big roadblocks, this one is one of the smaller ones. So we tended, after that study, to focus more on embarrassment. And one quick fun example would be like the contamination thing.
Right.
Like right now, condoms are put next to things that are socially sensitive and it bleeds. But what if you put condoms next to Band-Aids and to vitamins, right?
Right.
We
Interesting.
get a different result. And so that's the type of thing that, we wanted to explore after those initial studies.
Very interesting. Switching gears completely, I guess two more broad issues to cover. But again, as I tell all my great guests, I could keep you here for another 5 hours. Number one, uh, what do you think of the? And this is something that I've actually been quite active in terms of speaking publicly on these matters. What do you think of all of the sort of political correctness, safe spaces, trigger warnings, microaggressions that certainly have taken a foothold in many American universities and now is slowly making its way to Canada? Is this something that you care about? Is this something that you are seeing in your own experience as an academic? Tell us about it.
Well, I mean, first off, I think we have to care about these
Yeah.
things. I think it's foolish not to pay heed to these issues. Um, I mean, I guess what I would say is as an administrator, wherever these types of issues flare, you want to spend the time and the due diligence to try to figure out how to fix whatever that situation may be, whether it's everything from racial issues to gender issues to power issues to crime. I mean, there's lots of different problems that exist in society, and there's no question that some of them show up on American and Canadian, or frankly, worldwide university campuses. And so, how you deal with them, becomes a really important and interesting question. And so, to me, it's about trying to figure out what is the best solution. Sometimes we overreact on things, frankly, and then we create a new problem
Right.
With a solution that maybe goes too far as a solution, and it infringes on other things. And then sometimes we don't do enough. And so I think, it's trying to see, well, where are the real problems? And then what is the right balance in terms of solution?
Well,
But
there's
there's
a.
no
I'm sorry.
question we can do a better job. I mean,
Right.
all the research shows, not all the research, but research shows that, there's issues that need to be tackled. And I think it's on us to try to make a better university without losing what makes a university, and that's things like academic freedom, things like the ability to have respectful debate, the ability to also explore. And I think when you're a young person, university is where you should be able to make some mistakes, and you should be able to grow and explore. But that shouldn't come at a cost of hurting or stepping on other people and other issues. Does that I think that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think where I would maybe add to what you're saying is that you're exactly right that there's a tight balance to walk. I mean, you don't want to be frivolously rude and polite, hurtful to somebody. The problem has arisen where people now view disagreements as a form of assault, right? And therefore they create echo chambers, and the echo chamber is basically the university campus, where if you disagree with me, then I need a safe space from your alternate idea, right? And I recently gave a talk at the University of Ottawa under the I was invited by the Institute for Liberal Studies to talk about political correctness. And, a large part of my lecture, which I invite you to hopefully check it out, it was to really just document some of the most incredible, egregious examples of political correctness gone amok. And actually, there's one example from your university. I won't ask you to comment on it if you don't feel comfortable, because you may know the person. It was actually a professor, I think at UBC, or maybe it was one of the satellite campuses of UBC. I'm not sure. I can't remember. Where she basically filed a grievance that her tenure was denied because it was actually racially insensitive to her, because in her tradition, she's I don't know what the correct term now is. It First Nation or Native Canadian? There's an oral tradition, and so the whole process of writing things down and having them go through peer review was contrary to her culture, and that has gone now to a human rights appeal council, and they're actually going to hear that case. Well, I mean, I don't think you need to be a profoundly committed person to academic freedom to say that's lunacy, right? I mean, if somebody actually takes seriously the claim that to expect people to publish is an assault on their culture, we've gone too far. Yes?
I don't know, man. So you've picked a tough one, to be honest. Um, yeah, no, I know the case.
Oh, you do know the case? Okay, good.
Yeah, I know the case. It's so I won't come down as hard as you on that
Okay.
case, and the reason is this. Um, if there is so to me it's the base of producing knowledge and communication. And so I believe, yes, the norms, and this is where you are right. The norms in a university are to write and to publish. Fair enough. But I do believe that the net, and this goes back to where I started with meaningful.
Mm.
I believe that you can communicate knowledge in lots of different ways.
Sure.
And so if this individual is commuting and producing knowledge that is communicated in those cultural ways, maybe that's fine. But I need to see evidence that has actually been done, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And that to me is the heart of this case. And I don't know one way or the other because I don't know the analysis. But if they're going to make that claim, to me that's fine. But what I need to see is that that actually has happened. Because you can show that you've put in the time, you've put in the effort, you know, the outcome is meaningful
Right.
and it's tangible. And so whether we write it down or whether we make a movie or whether we do a podcast or whatever, I'm okay. I'm actually okay with that, right? As long as you're bringing new knowledge to the fore.
Right.
And that to me is the litmus test on this type of a case. I think that's an anomaly. I mean, it's not in the norm. I think 99.9% of people at an American university are going to write papers or books because that's the norm. But I'm okay with other ways as long as you can verify that knowledge is being created and that there's tangible evidence that this person has done that. Because then they have a case.
Right.
What I'm scared of and why this has got you fired up is people are using these types of strategies or positions to hide and not be accountable for what the society needs them to be doing as academics.
Right.
If
Fair
that
enough.
makes sense.
No, that's fair enough. Very charitable position on your part, but fair enough. Incredibly charitable. Outlandishly charitable. But hey, it's okay. We'll give you a free pass. Let's.
No, I mean, I just think we have to be acceptance of kinds of knowledge creation. I'm just going to be skeptical, and this is where I match you, and I'm going to be like, then show me
Right.
that you've created knowledge.
Fair enough.
That's what you're supposed to do as a professor, right?
Got you. Beautiful. Last question. Good one to sort of end the chat. What are some of the things? So now you've been, I guess, have you been a professor now for 2 decades? Is it? I think 96 you graduated. Is that right? 96?
Yeah, well, you looked up the CV.
I
Yeah,
did the
no,
homework. That's right.
It's
Yes.
been a couple years. Yeah.
Yeah. So, what are the things that you love most about being a professor? And if any, there must be some. What are some things that you dislike in your chosen career?
Wow. Um, well, first off, I feel like truthfully I've won the lottery. I was lucky to come into this as an occupation. It wasn't on the game plan. I was going to be an accountant. I
Oh,
was very misguided. Apologies to accountants. It just didn't work out for me. So I feel like I won the lottery. I'm a bit odd as an academic because I like all of it. So the teaching is I don't have to teach in my current position, but I still do. I still teach close to a full load, and the reason is it's just fun. Like I love the teaching part. The research is great because you get paid to be curious, as I said before. The administration I find really fun because it's really challenging. You work in an environment with really smart people. Some people compare it to herding cats. It's kind of like that. And you learn that you have to be, and you saw in my last answer, you have to be very balanced and politically astute. And I've made lots of mistakes on that side, but I've learned a lot, and I find the people that we work with are really really interesting, and so the administrative part I love too. I do a fair bit of consulting in exec ed, and that's fun because you're out in the real world, and you can work with a different type of smart person. I think sometimes academics think they've got the corner on smart, but that's just not true. Whenever you work with C-suite or leaders in government or industry or charity, I'm blown away by how smart and how fun it is to work with these types of people. So there's all the positives. It's really fun.
No negative, not a single one.
Oh well, I love all those things. Uh, what is tough, right, is on the administrative side you can never make everybody happy,
Right.
and so that's hard, and so people. I like to make people happy, frankly, and the teaching's great because you can usually do that. But with administration, you're going to have to be someone that says no, and that's often hard, right? And some people get that's the office and they respect that. Other people, they feel a little more, I don't know, entitled maybe. And so they have a harder time with the office of no, if you want to call it that.
Right. Right.
So that can be hard. The other hard things in our job right now are, resources are difficult. I think that can be tough in terms of trying to do your research or run a school. I think it's tougher and tougher to publish. People always say, "Whoa, you've published a lot. It must be easy." I tell you, it's harder this year, I think, than any year.
Right.
It's for me at least. Maybe I just haven't figured it out, but I find it's hard. I know you would say the same thing. I
Yeah.
mean, you think that your papers are always like kids, right? And they're amazing and they're beautiful,
Right.
and the journals don't always feel that way,
True.
and that's tough. But that's part of it.
I'll
And
tell you. I'm sorry.
and
Go ahead.
challenge is fun, right? We love challenge.
Right. I was going to say, Michelle Pham gave a very interesting question to the exact same, a very interesting answer to the exact same question. When I pushed him on what are some of the things that you don't like, he gave the following answer, which I thought was kind of interesting, and then it motivated me to actually do a sad truth clip, kind of addressing it. He said, one of the things that really irks me about my job is when I meet people and I tell them that I'm a professor, then they say, "Oh, so I mean, other than you teach your 3 hours, I get what else do you do? I mean, what do you do? You do nothing, right?" And it's funny because I've had members of my own family tease me, thinking that I just go sit at a cafe with a cigar and just kind of philosophize with people that are sitting there, but otherwise I do nothing, right? Uh,
But
and
that is what you do. I've seen you doing. No, just kidding. I'm
but
kidding.
it's funny because that led me to actually do a clip where I literally enumerated all of the things that a professor does. And the reality is, I think I could speak for both of us, that we probably work 12 to 18-hour days all the time. Now, of course, we don't call it work because we love it,
It's
but
play, man.
that's what we're doing. We're playing, but so that was his answer in terms of what he doesn't like. But otherwise, he agreed with you that he loves everything about it. Hey, Darren, this was fantastic. Is there anything that you want to maybe promote or have me point to in the descriptor of the video that we haven't talked about yet that you want to just plug now? Is there anything that you'd like to do?
No, I mean, I think it was a fun conversation. I mean, I hope the listeners and people that follow you, do get some insight on what it's like, the challenges of, and the fun parts of being a professor and academic. I guess one thing I'd say is I never considered this as a career, and if there's young people that do listen to your show, I think it's kind of a cool occupation. I mean, you get to touch people's lives and change people's lives and produce knowledge. So, I hope if there's any young people out there listening that they would consider, and then maybe not even young. I know people that have changed careers and come and done this in their 40s. It's a very rewarding and a fun life. So I
What
guess
a
that.
what a wonderful way to end this the chat. Stay on the line. Thank you so much, Darren. I'm gonna stop it now, but stay on the line.
You bet.